In November of 1930, a Canadian fur trapper named Joe LaBelle made his way across the frozen landscape of what was then the Northwest Territories. He was heading toward a small Inuit settlement on the shores of Lake Anjikuni, and LaBelle knew the village well. He'd passed through before on his trapping routes, and had always been greeted warmly by its inhabitants. It was a community of roughly 25 people who lived off the land in one of the most remote corners of the continent. The area around Lake Anjikuni, now part of the Kivalik region of Nunavut, is a vast stretch of the Canadian Shield, scraped flat by ancient glaciers and dotted with lakes and rivers. It's the kind of place where the cold winds can erase absolutely everything beneath them. In November, the average temperature stays well below freezing, and the lake itself becomes an unbroken sheet of ice indistinguishable from the barren tundra surrounding it. This was the world LaBelle walked into, expecting a hot meal and a warm place to sleep. What he found instead was silence. According to the account that would eventually reach print, LaBelle called out as he approached the settlement but received no response. He moved through the village and discovered it completely abandoned with the tents and shelters still intact. Unfinished garments lay with needles still threaded through the fabric, and old food hung over fire pits where the flames had long since gone out. Personal belongings and provisions remained undisturbed, as though the inhabitants had simply stood up and walked away in the middle of their daily routines. More disturbing still, LaBelle reportedly found the bodies of 7 sled dogs that had starved to death, still tethered to their posts. And then there was the grave. At least one burial site had been opened and emptied, with the stones that once encircled it still carefully in place, suggesting no animal had done the digging. LaBelle, shaken by what he'd seen, made his way to the nearest telegraph office and contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. This is the story as it's often told, but upon further examination of the historical record, there's something more going on here. The earliest known published account of this incident appeared in the November 27, 1930 edition of the Danville Bee, a newspaper out of, you guessed it, Danville, in Virginia. The article was written by a journalist named Emmett Keller, who identified himself as a special correspondent. Keller's version described a village of about 25 people, mentioned the dead dogs and the emptied grave, and included a generic stock photograph of an Inuit village. For decades, this article was mistakenly attributed to the Halifax Herald, a confusion that persisted until researchers traced the original to its correct source. Keller's piece was relatively restrained compared to what would come later, but it contained enough eerie detail to catch a reader's imagination. Not long after, on January 17, 1931, a formal investigation of the story was conducted by an officer known as Nelson. Nelson had spoken with local traders and determined that Joe LaBelle was indeed a real person who worked as a trapper in northern Manitoba and traveled further north regularly. However, no one in the region had heard of this village or its alleged disappearance. Nelson also discovered that the photograph Keller used was a stock photograph, despite being presented as the real deal in the article. Based on these findings, Nelson concluded that the entire story was a sensationalized fabrication, likely invented or heavily embellished by Keller. The authorities filed the matter away, and for nearly 3 decades, the story of Lake Anjikuni essentially disappeared from public consciousness. The story might have stayed buried if not for a man named Frank Edwards. Edwards was an American writer and radio broadcaster who'd built a career around tales of the unexplained. In 1959, he published a book called Stranger Than Science, a collection of short accounts of paranormal events and unsolved mysteries. These were drawn largely from his syndicated radio program, where he had related these stories to his audience for years. Edwards devoted 3 pages to the Lake Anjikuni disappearance, slightly inflating the village's population from 25 to about 30. He described the scene LaBelle allegedly encountered in vivid terms, detailing the abandoned meals, the frozen dog carcasses, and the baffling absence of any explanation. Edwards offered no sources and made no reference to either the 1930 newspaper article or the 1931 investigation. His version read like a campfire tale polished for a national audience, and it worked. The book was a bestseller, and the Lake Anjikuni story was reborn. For the next 17 years or so, the story circulated quietly through books about the paranormal, but nobody added anything particularly new. That changed in November 1976, when a writer named Dwight Whalen published a cover story in Fate magazine titled Vanished Village Revisited. Whalen was apparently the first person to track down the original 1930 newspaper article and the 1931 police report, connecting dots that Edwards had either overlooked or chosen to ignore. When Whalen contacted the authorities directly, he was told they had no record of any unusual event at Lake Anjikuni. Whalen's conclusion was cautious but pointed, and he suggested the whole story was likely invented by Keller. In the alternative, he thought it was possibly based on a tall tale he'd heard from LaBelle, who may or may not have stumbled upon the genuine remains of an abandoned camp. After all, this may provide a reason how LaBelle, who was confirmed by the 1931 investigation to be a real person active in the area, came into the story. That said, to me, Joe LaBelle sounds like the most stereotypical Canadian fur trapper name possible, so it's theoretically possible that it's a coincidence. Things took a sharp turn into the bizarre in April 1977 when a reader wrote to Fate magazine disputing Whalen's conclusions, and this was no ordinary individual. That reader was Betty Hill, one half of the most famous alleged alien abduction case in history. Hill claimed that she and her husband Barney had once met a Captain Larson on a ferry at the Bay of Fundy. Larson, according to her, was a former Mountie that had spent 9 years investigating the Anjikuni disappearance. According to Hill, Larson believed the villagers had been abducted by beings from another planet. Whether or not this encounter actually happened, the letter served as the catalyst to change the story into something more. From that point forward, writers began folding the Anjikuni story into their work, each time adding a little more to it. The most dramatic escalation came in 1983, when Nigel Blundell and Roger Bohr published The World's Great Mysteries. Their version inflated the village population from 30 to an astonishing 1,200, a number which is still thrown about. And while 1,200 people might sound like a village anywhere else, in the area that's now Nunavut, it would have been one of the largest settlements at the time. They also introduced a new element entirely in the form of even more French-Canadian fur trappers. Armand Laurent and his 2 sons allegedly witnessed a large cylindrical object in the sky that transformed into a bullet shape before flying toward the lake. This detail had never appeared in any earlier version of the story, and the sourcing on the claim is non-existent. The book also added claims about entire cemeteries being emptied of their dead, far more dramatic than the single disturbed grave in Keller's original account. With each retelling, the story grew, and the line between what LaBelle may have actually reported and what was invented by subsequent authors became increasingly impossible to trace. A number of investigators have attempted to debunk the Anjikuni story by focusing on small factual inconsistencies in the various retellings. They point to things like environmental details, materials used in kayaks, and changing population figures across different versions of the account. These critics argue that such discrepancies suggest the story evolved through retellings rather than reflecting a literal historical event. Personally, though, I'm not particularly interested in that kind of granular nitpicking. Minor inconsistencies and shifting details are common in stories that circulate over time, and focusing too heavily on them can miss the broader narrative or cultural significance of the tale. That said, I think we can actually look to the evidence to figure out what kernel of truth may exist in this story, if there is indeed any at all. One possibility is that LaBelle did encounter an abandoned campsite, but that the abandonment wasn't mysterious at all. The Inuit of the Central Arctic were semi-nomadic, moving seasonally to follow caribou herds and to access different resources at different times of year. A camp that appeared suddenly empty to an outsider might simply have been one that its inhabitants had left on schedule, taking what they needed and leaving behind what they didn't. The dead sled dogs, if they existed, could point to an emergency departure driven by disease, a failed hunt, or a dispute within the group. Camps were sometimes abandoned quickly when conditions demanded it, and items that were unnecessary for the journey ahead would be left behind. As for the disturbed grave, this too has some potentially mundane explanations. Permafrost burial practices in the Arctic sometimes involved shallow interment covered with stones. These graves could be disturbed by natural forces, by animals, or even by other Inuit following cultural practices unfamiliar to a European trapper. LaBelle's assertion that the stones around the grave were undisturbed doesn't necessarily mean human hands weren't involved. It simply means he couldn't identify the cause. It's plausible that LaBelle found something genuinely unsettling, something he couldn't explain with his own experience, and that the story grew from there. Keller, a journalist looking for a dramatic dispatch from the north, would have had every incentive to sharpen the edges and lean into the mystery. What makes the Lake Anjikuni story endure isn't the strength of the evidence, it's the image. There's something deeply unsettling about the idea of an entire community vanishing in the middle of ordinary life, leaving behind the half-finished evidence of their existence. It taps into a primal fear of abandonment and erasure, the idea that a person or a people can simply be wiped from the earth without explanation. That fear is amplified by the setting, a landscape so vast and so empty that it feels as though it could swallow anything without leaving a trace. The story also endures because it's been so useful to so many different kinds of storytellers. The original Keller article provides enough evidence to suggest that something happened that anyone interested in the unexplained can slot their own theories into the few facts. Of course, it appears to me that Blundell and Bohr, or perhaps their publisher, wanted something a bit spicier than the subtly mysterious version originally told by Keller. For what it's worth, the Mounties today maintain that the entire incident is an urban legend, and in all likelihood, they're right. The chain of evidence leads back to a single newspaper article written by a journalist whose credibility was questioned almost immediately. Unusual for a case like this is that the Mounties actually investigated the claims almost immediately, who discounted Keller's report. But at the very heart of it, there's likely a real historical event that happened, involving a somewhat mysterious fur trader named Joe LaBelle and a vanishing Inuit camp. For centuries, the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall was a whispered legend, confined to the corridors of a Norfolk mansion. Then, in 1936, two photographers claimed they captured her on film, and the Brown Lady became arguably the most famous ghost in the history of photography of the era. Most accounts trace the identity of the Brown Lady to Lady Dorothy Walpole, the sister of Sir Robert Walpole, who's widely considered Britain's first Prime Minister. Dorothy married Charles Townshend, the second Viscount Townshend, in 1713. It was actually her second marriage, as she'd previously been married to a man who died young. By most historical records, the marriage to Townshend was deeply troubled. Townshend was known for his volatile temper and there were persistent rumors that he kept Dorothy locked away in Raynham Hall after discovering she'd been unfaithful. Some versions of the story claim she was confined to a set of rooms and forbidden from seeing her children. She died in 1726, and the official cause was listed as smallpox, though skeptics over the centuries have questioned whether her death was quite so straightforward. The nickname itself comes from the brown brocade dress the figure is said to wear when she appears. Witnesses across multiple generations described seeing a woman in a brown gown drifting through the halls and staircases of Raynham Hall. The earliest reported encounters with the Brown Lady date to the early 19th century, though it's likely the stories circulated privately among servants and family members before. During a Christmas gathering in 1835, one Colonel Loftus, a guest at the estate, claimed he saw the apparition on 2 separate nights. He described her as a woman of aristocratic bearing wearing a brown satin dress, but what disturbed him most were her eyes. He said the figure's eye sockets appeared dark and hollow, as though the eyes themselves had been gouged out. His account was considered credible enough at the time that local artists were commissioned to paint the figure based on his description. Unfortunately, this painting appears to have not been notable enough at the time, and it slipped into the spooky realm of lost media. Either that, or it's just not notable enough to have been digitized. Take your pick. But hey, it's my video, and I'm going for historical lost media on vibes alone. Another notable encounter involved Captain Frederick Marryat, a celebrated Royal Navy officer and novelist, who was no stranger to danger or deception. Marryat reportedly stayed at Raynham Hall specifically because he was skeptical of the ghost stories and wanted to debunk them. He was, by all accounts, a practical man who had faced storms at sea and combat, and he found the idea of a ghost in a country house rather absurd. According to the account, the captain encountered the apparition in a hallway one night, and what he did next is honestly kind of hilarious and lends credence to the story in my view. He claimed the figure grinned at him in a diabolical fashion, and in a moment of panic, he fired his pistol directly at her. The bullet passed through the specter and lodged in a door behind her. Whether Marryat's account is entirely reliable has been debated, but it added a vivid and dramatic chapter to the Brown Lady's growing legend. The moment that transformed the Brown Lady from a regional ghost story into an international sensation came on September 19, 1936. Captain Provand and Inder Shira, 2 photographers working for Country Life magazine, were at Raynham Hall to photograph the interiors for a feature article. The assignment was routine architectural documentation, the kind of work the magazine published regularly to showcase Britain's grand estates. As Provand set up a shot of the oak staircase, Shira reportedly noticed a veiled, luminous figure descending the steps. He urged Provand to take the photograph immediately, and Provand, though he hadn't seen anything himself, complied. When the plate was developed, it appeared to show a translucent, ghostly figure on the staircase, draped in what looked like a white veil or shroud. The image was first published in Country Life on December 1st, 1936, and it caused an immediate stir. It was subsequently picked up by newspapers and paranormal publications around the world. The photograph remains one of the most widely reproduced and debated images in the history of the paranormal. Also, if you're just listening, now would be the time to look and check out this picture and see what you think for yourself. Skeptics have naturally offered alternative explanations, varying in their potential plausibility. Some photographic experts have suggested the image could be the result of double exposure, a smear of grease on the lens, or light leaking onto the plate during development. Others have pointed out that the figure's appearance doesn't closely match the traditional description of the brown lady in her brown dress. Notably, the ghost in the photograph appears in white, and according to some sources, she appears to be wearing a veil. whether what's actually being seen is an outline of a veil or just her hair is open to interpretation, in my view. The most interesting theory is that this photograph is a simple overlay of a statue of the Madonna on the staircase, a hypothesis that I find fairly alluring. Defenders of the photograph's authenticity have noted that Provand and Shira maintained their account consistently and claimed neither photographer had a known motive for fabrication. They've also noted that there has been no definitive debunking of the photograph, despite it being nearly a century old. What makes the brown lady endure isn't just the photograph, though that certainly helped cement her place in the paranormal canon. It's the depth of the historical narrative behind her. If Dorothy Walpole truly was imprisoned in her own home, cut off from her children, and left to die in isolation, then the ghost story becomes something more than a campfire tale. It becomes a story about injustice, about suffering, and about the refusal to be forgotten. The aristocratic setting of Raynham Hall, with its imposing facade and centuries of accumulated power, adds a layer of Gothic weight that few haunted houses can match. The Townshend family has largely been private about the ghost stories, neither aggressively promoting nor categorically denying the haunting. Raynham Hall isn't a tourist attraction in the way that some allegedly haunted properties have become, which lends it a kind of restraint that makes it more compelling rather than less. Reports of sightings have diminished significantly since the mid-20th century, leading some to speculate that whatever energy was behind the manifestation has dissipated. Others take a more pragmatic view and suggest that the legend simply ran its natural course as the cultural appetite for Victorian-style ghost stories waned. Personally, though, this ghost attracted my attention due to its relation to important figures in British history and the narrative that goes along with it. Long before Hollywood existed and before the Lumiere brothers screened their famous footage of workers leaving a factory, a French-born inventor had done something extraordinary. He'd captured the world's first moving pictures while he was working in his workshop in Leeds in England. His name was Louis-Aimé Augustin Leprince, and by the autumn of 1890, he was preparing to show his invention to the world, but he never got the chance. On September 16th of that year, Leprince stepped onto a train in Dijon, France, and vanished without a trace. His body was never found, his luggage was never recovered, and more than a century later, nobody can say for certain what happened to him. Leprince was born in Metz, France, in 1841, the son of an artillery officer in the French army. His father's close friend happened to be Louis Daguerre, the man widely credited with inventing the daguerreotype photographic process. As a boy, Leprince reportedly spent time in Daguerre's studio, absorbing early lessons in chemistry and photography that would profoundly shape the entire course of his life. He went on to study painting in Paris and postgraduate chemistry at the University of Leipzig in Germany. While this may sound odd, this gave him a rare and potent combination of artistic sensibility and rigorous scientific knowledge. In the 1860s, Leprince moved to England, where he married Elizabeth Whitley, a talented artist from Leeds. Together they founded the Leeds Technical School of Art and built a reputation for their innovative work in fixing colored photographs onto metal and pottery. Their clients included Queen Victoria and Prime Minister William Gladstone. But despite this big league patronage, Leprince had financial troubles, a fact that'll be important shortly. Eventually, the family relocated to New York, where Leprince managed a group of French artists specializing in panoramic paintings. But throughout all of this, his mind was consumed by a singular obsession, capturing and reproducing motion on film. His wallet was also consumed by it as well, because those financial troubles didn't come from mismanagement, but from reinvesting every penny back into his film obsession. In January 1888, Le Prince was granted an American patent for a 16-lens camera device that he intended to function as both a motion picture camera and a projector. But it was his subsequent work with a single-lens camera that proved revolutionary. On October 14, 1888, in the garden of Oakwood Grange in Roundhay in Leeds, the home of his wife's parents, Le Prince used this camera to film. That work would be what's now known as the Roundhay garden scene. The short clip shows his son, his father-in-law Joseph Whitley, his mother-in-law, and a family friend walking and laughing in the garden. It lasts only roughly 2 seconds, but it's arguably the oldest surviving motion picture in existence. During that same period, Le Prince also filmed his son playing an accordion, and at some point in the following months, captured footage of horse-drawn traffic crossing Leeds Bridge. Those close to him later testified that he'd successfully projected these films in his workshop, though no public demonstration ever took place. Le Prince was a perfectionist, and he wouldn't show his work until he was absolutely certain it functioned flawlessly. Over the next 2 years, he continued refining his equipment, converting from paper film stock to celluloid, and improving his projector designs with the help of his assistant. By 1890, Le Prince was finally ready for a public display in New York City. But then, just like that, the pioneering Frenchman disappeared. In September 1890, Le Prince traveled to France following the death of his mother to visit his brother Albert in Dijon and settle family affairs. On the 16th, Albert allegedly accompanied him to the Dijon train station, where Le Prince boarded an express train bound for Paris. Notably, Albert was the only person who witnessed this event, a fact that has drawn suspicion now for over a century, but I'll come back to that in a moment. Le Prince was carrying his luggage and reportedly had materials related to his patents with him, though this has never been confirmed with absolute certainty. Friends were waiting to meet him in Paris before he continued on to England and then sailed to New York for his planned demonstration. He never arrived, and when the train pulled into Paris, Le Prince wasn't on it. His friends searched for him, but there was no sign of the inventor. No fellow passenger reported seeing him aboard the train. Given that Le Prince stood roughly 6 feet 3 inches tall and wore distinctive mutton chop sideburns, he wasn't someone who blended easily into a crowd. Both the French police and Scotland Yard launched investigations, but neither turned up a single lead. No body, no belongings, no witnesses, nothing. In 1897, 7 years after his disappearance, Le Prince was officially declared dead under French law. The vacuum left by Le Prince's disappearance has been filled with speculation ever since. Several competing theories have emerged over the decades, though none of them conclusively proven. The most sensational theory points the finger at Thomas Edison. Le Prince's widow, Elizabeth, was the most vocal proponent of this idea. She believed Edison had Le Prince kidnapped and slain to eliminate a competitor. Just weeks after Le Prince vanished, Edison filed a preliminary patent application for a motion picture camera that bore a striking resemblance to Le Prince's design. By May 1891, Edison's workers publicly debuted the kinetograph, and Edison went on to claim he was the sole inventor of cinematography. He aggressively used the patent system to assert dominance over the fledgling film industry, suing competitors into submission. However, no hard evidence has ever directly connected Edison or anyone in his employ to Le Prince's disappearance. Personally, I would dismiss this hypothesis completely, since while we know that Edison was willing to crush the competition, he always did it by the letter of the law. Another theory focuses on Le Prince's brother, Albert, and this is the idea that I personally prefer. He was the last person known to have seen Le Prince alive, and there was a financial dispute between them over their mother's estate. By 1890, Le Prince had accumulated extremely significant debts working on his various projects. Albert was the executor of their mother's will. and Le Prince was owed money that Albert appeared reluctant to pay. Some historians have speculated that the dispute turned violent, and that Albert's account of waving his brother off at the station may have been fabricated. However, surviving letters between the brothers suggest a warm relationship, and Le Prince's descendants have pushed back against this theory. That said, nothing comes between a happy family relationship like money, and Albert stood to benefit massively if his brother went missing. But while I did say this is the theory I prefer, it's entirely circumstantial, and I fully admit that there's no hard evidence for it. I do find it very odd that no one on the train saw Le Prince, though, given how unusually tall he was, especially for the time. For decades, Le Prince's contributions were largely forgotten, and Thomas Edison received credit in America, while the Lumiere brothers took their share of the spoils in France. It wasn't until the 1920s that serious attention returned to Le Prince's work, and recognition has grown steadily since. In 1930, a bronze memorial plaque was unveiled at his former workshop on Woodhouse Lane in Leeds. The University of Leeds later named its Center for Cinema, Photography, and Television after him. At the end of the day, the story of Louis Le Prince is one of remarkable genius, overshadowed by enduring mystery. He created the world's first moving pictures, years ahead of the famous names that would eventually receive the credit for his pioneering work. Whatever happened on that fateful September day in 1890, this inventor of cinema left behind a transformative invention that helped change the world forever.